Hi, everybody. Your assignment, which is going to be due by next class, which is going to be Monday, if you can't get it done today, is going to be to finish the eight string tasks which were assigned in the previous class. So I'm going to take a little time. I'm going to go through a few things, give you some hints, and hopefully that will help you get to where you need to go. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is something in here that you've never seen before. So um, I use this keyword final for a variable. So there's a couple things that are a little different here. You don't really need to know this year, but this is going to be a good preview for some of the things you do if you go onto the AP. So first you'll notice that it's this variable up here is defined outside of the main method. That means it's going to be defined everywhere. Um, and also, importantly, you're going to notice that this is defined as final. Okay, so final, that means that once its value is set, it can't be changed. And this is useful largely as a communication tool. I mean, you could just set a variable and then not change it. But this communicates to anybody who's looking at your code that this is not meant to change. And in fact, it cannot change. So let me just show you real quick. So, for example, let's say I get down here and I wanted to change my original into something else. In theory, most cases, I would be able to do that, right? It's just changing the value of a string. But when I try to execute it, you'll see I get this error. Cannot assign a value to the final variable origin. Because it's a final variable, it means that you quite literally cannot compile it if you change it. And because we want to keep using that same value, I did that final. So again, not something I'm going to test you on, but something that's handy here and something you'll need to understand a little bit better once you get to the AP class. Okay, so let's ignore that for now. I did not really want to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at method 1 and 2, this backward print. Most of you guys did a really good job on it. There's a fairly obvious solution working backwards with a char at, and I will go through that. There's some other ways. Some of you guys did some fairly complicated stuff and in many cases got it working, but I just want to take a look at that. And then I'm going to go on and I'm going to give you some hints. At that point, what I would really urge you to do is if you feel like you have some good ideas, if you want to try them yourself, you can just turn on the video and do it without the hints and just come back to it if you need it. But if you feel like you've been working on this for a while and you're struggling, you can just go ahead to the hints. All right, onward. Let's look at these backwards methods. So these backwards methods look almost the same. The difference here is the first one is a void method. So it's going to actually do the printing. So it actually can be a little simpler if all I have to do is print. I start with the last character in my string, which is going to be the length of the string minus 1. Remember, it's a minus 1 because the string, like an array, it starts counting at 0. So if it has 10 things in it, those are, thing at index 0 through 9. So I go from, suppose we had 10 things. This would represent the thing at index 9 all the way back to the thing at index 0. I use a greater than or equal to. Some of you did greater than -1. Of course, that also would have the same effect. And importantly, because it's the whole point, I am going backwards. And then all I need to do is just print out the character each time. So that's kind of the simplest. This is a very iconic example with starting to get used to the string methods using the char at. I will note you could also use a substring, which is a little bit of a technical difference, but that would just be you could use a one character substring by this substring method. But char at is a little more natural, I think, for your first time doing this. Okay, so how's that different from backwards 2? Well, backwards 2, you're doing basically the same thing, except instead of just printing it out as you go, you are going to put together a new string, which is just the old string backwards. So I start with an empty string, and then I go through and I keep appending to that empty string. First, I'd append the last character, then the second last, then in this going forward like that. And once I get through that whole for loop and I've appended all the characters in reverse order, I simply return it. And then back at the top, when I get it back, I print it out. Easy enough. Okay, if you're good, then you don't really need to watch more of this video. If you want some hints, stay tuned. I'll go through a couple more things. Number three, the capitalization. That's pretty easy one. All I'm going to say about that is you really only need to do one method. That's a pretty simple one. Number four is more complicated, and my hint to you would be that you might want to uh, create a char array with the vowels. Then what you can do is you can just kind of keep looping through and testing if something is a vowel. So testing effectively if it's in this array. It's reasonable to do. There's 5 vowels, and you can do upper and lowercase, so you have an array of 10 things. It's not a crazy amount of things to put all into an array. So you can just go through, test each character to see if it's in here, and if it is, then you go ahead and change it. So that's basically what you need to do. And note, again, this is a string method, so you're going to return a string. I put these dummies in here just so the thing would compile. If I didn't have a return statement, then it wouldn't compile, and I wouldn't be able to demonstrate some of this stuff. So this is a technique. If you're writing your code and you want to try to test other things, and you haven't gotten to writing something yet, it's a good idea. Just put a dummy return statement in there as a placeholder to let things compile. Every other. I didn't actually write out a hint here, but it's fairly straightforward. The idea is you go through every other character, so you can just, in your for loop, advance two at a time. I've said enough there. Okay, the last three, though, are going to all basically, I mean, there are other ways you could do it. There's always different ways you could do it, but the easiest way to do these last three is relying on the split method. The split method is actually pretty powerful. It's going to take your string and split it into an array of strings. I'll say that again. So it takes a single string and splits it into an array of strings. And that is actually very useful for splitting into separate words. In practice, in real life, you need to be careful, and you got to be sure that your code is, or what you're reading is formatted correctly. But for this very specific purpose, what you'll notice is that all the words in our statement are separated by spaces, right? So I have the space, 5 space, boxing space. So if I call the split method on that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a array of strings back where element 0 will be the, element 1 will be 5, element 2 will be boxing, 3 will be wizards, etc. So it actually is quite handy to do things like reverse or put it in a different order or count things individually. Let me just go a little bit further with that. I'm not going to do all of these. Let me go a little bit farther with the, let's do char count. Okay. I'm not going to do it completely, but I'll take this a little bit further. So first, I'm going to use this to demonstrate the split. So what I could do is I'm going to make a string array. We'll call it words. And my string array of words is going to be basically the split str split. So remember, in theory, this is now going to have all of the different words in separately. And so then what I can do is I can loop through and I could do anything I want with it. So I'm just going to show you that real quick, and then you are going to do the, do executing what you actually need to do for this purpose. All right, so let's do int I equals 0. So starting with the first word, I'm going through all the words, so up to words.length. Remember, this actually is a little deceptive. This just means the length of the array of words, not the length of an actual individual word. I plus, so I go through all of them for each of them. For now, I'm just going to print it out, right? System.out print, and I will print my just to make sure that it's working how I want, and I'll put something in between it. Let me do a pipe. Okay, so now that you just print out all the words, it'll look similar, except now effectively instead of a space, we'll have a pipe. Actually, you know what? Let me put a little spaces here too, so we can kind of see it a little more clearly. So that's going to execute. It's not doing what it's supposed to do yet, but I'm just kind of giving a better idea of how this thing works. All right, let me execute that. Yoips. No suitable method found. String.split. Stand by for a second. Okay, I had paused for a second because I just saw I got a bunch of errors because I forgot to put in my space. So when I split it, I need to split on a space. So I need to tell it that I'm going to split it based on the space and put them all into separate ones. So if you run into that error, make sure you use the space argument there. Then I told it to write the words with a pipe in between it. So you can see now, they're my words that I'm printing out now as part of an array. Of course, that was just for illustration purposes. That's not what I actually want to do. What I want to do is I'm going to figure out, I need to do two things to figure out the average. I want to figure out the number of words, right? So you should be able to figure out the number of words, right? Well, we already did that in the previous exercise. Well, you will have done that. The number of words, and then I'm going to do the length. So what is the total length of each of the words? So I'm going to make a new variable here called int total length. Of course, that has to be one word. And I'll start with that being 0. And then what I'm going to do, instead of the silliness of printing it out, I am going to add the length of each of these things. So total length is going to do plus equals words I dot length. So in other words, I'm just going to keep adding up the first word plus the second word plus the third word, and that's going to give me the overall length. And then if I divide that by the number of the words, it should be all good. So again, I'm not giving you the final answer. You still need to do the division and figure out the number of words, but I will leave it here. I'm going to do a system out that print line and print out total length, which should be effectively the total length of all the words put together. So you just need to divide this total length again by the number of words and then return that as a double, and you should be all good. All right, let's see what happens here. Of course, I broke something again. Length. I bet you can figure out what I did, right? Words I, right? That's going to be a string. We're going to do a string length, not an array length. So instead of doing just a length, this is actually a method. So there we go. That should be all better. Yeah. So that means that there's a total of 31 characters effectively overall. And then I'm effectively going to divide that by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's going to give me my length. Make sure you do double division and not an integer division. Otherwise, it's going to round it unnecessarily. That's the hardest one, I think, of the lot. And I've done kind of most of it for you. Hopefully that helps. Keep plugging away at it. And thank you for watching. Have a good day.